Complex learning. What is it? So before we dive into any details, I want to jog your brain a little bit. Let's take a look at this graphic. Do you ever think about what you're thinking about? With a little shocked look on his face, the other guy's happily sitting there smiling. And then boom, he blows up. So, if we reflect on what we're thinking about, and what learning strategies we might use while we're thinking or trying to learn something, I want you to think back to the times in your life where you've actually intentionally tried to learn something. I'm thinking about as recent as taking our place praxis exams to get into this course, or this program, excuse me. And, what learning strategies or study strategies did you use? Maybe you go back to college and you think about some of the times then. Grab a piece of paper, and I want this to be at least a 30-second free write where you just write anything that comes to mind of different things that you've used that help you be successful. Hit pause now. Okay. Hopefully you have a list of a few things in front of you. I wouldn't be surprised if you're a little stumped at first, because what learning strategies do we use? Or do we just do it, just do things? Or are we being really intentional? Are we reflecting on it? That's a lot of what we're going to be talking about here, is our higher level complex learning and what it is, how we do it, how we can be more effective at it, and then, of course, as teachers, how we can help our students become more successful and effective. So put that list aside for a second, and I highly suggest if there's effective strategies that you like note-taking or whatnot, please use that while we're going through this program. So, question, do you know how to learn? And it's kind of funny because many people don't. Like I said, if we reflect on it, we know that we're doing it, but do we really know what we're doing? So it starts with metacognition, which is basically thinking about thinking. So it's our own personal, regulatory system that helps us understand and control our own performances. So as you might have guessed, it does involve not only awareness of how you learn, but it also should include some sort of evaluation of that learning. And then, of course, generating different strategies and implementing those strategies to become more effective. And not surprisingly, we can, as learners, increase our self-confidence and even our productiveness when we build additional skills in this area. And the thing is, they're generally learned later in life. Like, I don't know about you, but I may have learned note-taking and highlighting and some basic things for learning back in high school, but it wasn't until college that I really had to start being proactive and intentional. And even then, I don't know that anyone really taught me. It was more trial by error, or doing it wrong a few times, or pulling many, many late-nighters before I really realized that, or even now, fast forward to 33 years old in this program, and I'm going, wow, I haven't been using all of the possible strategies out there that could really be helping me. So what makes a successful learner? And it says the most successful students are self-regulating and they're very intentional. So a few different things. So metacognition, as you look at the graphic in the center, there's the different strategies, there's our motivations, and then also our self-monitoring and reflectiveness. And all those different parts go into our learning, and it's really up to us to make that happen. And a couple things is really taking a look at our own motivations and our goals, and our epistemic beliefs, which are basically our beliefs around what knowledge is, and just the nature of knowledge to us and the nature of learning and what we believe, like what possibilities we consider, or what learning is even possible. And then the other thing is having those actually effective different strategies that not only are out there but that work and work for you specifically. So that that definitely needs some intentionality and regulation. in terms of reflecting back and saying, hey, is this note-taking really helping me? Am I asking myself questions? Did I read an entire passage of a book and get to the end and realize that I have no freaking idea what I just read? I've done that so many times in the last month and have had to go back and reread those passages and then question myself and even, summarize what I've learned. So we have to actively and consciously be engaged in our own learning process throughout. And I don't think that those are skills that we necessarily just come upon as we get older. So I just rattled off a few different strategies that are out there. And maybe if you take a look at that list of yours that you brainstormed of strategies you've used, you may have some of these on there. But some of the more effective ways are definitely asking yourself questions. Also self-reflection on what you just learned, what you might still want to learn. Also, if we teach strategies directly to children, for example, of like how to learn and how to go about that, such as whether it's note-taking skills or summarization, and then, like I said, comprehension monitoring, so going back and questioning, do I understand what I just read? Another few, thinking aloud, discussions with other peers, and self-explanation. So explaining it to yourself to take a look at if there's a fluid stream of thought there, and then provide opportunities for making errors. Obviously, a safe environment to be able to question and take a look and potentially be wrong. A few other ones that are definitely really useful that you may have found on your list too is maybe using mnemonic devices, listing things, using mapping or organizational tools, like web maps and whatnot. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use, and the most important part though is not just using those, but actually then the self-reflection of, are those working for you? And are these strategies effective in getting you the results that you want? And that is, unfortunately, we have a tendency to be rather misinformed about how to best learn and study, and then we also have, I guess, expectations of what we're capable of that are not always realistic in terms of, I'll just rely on my memory, or, I can cram everything in the last minute the night before, which I personally am guilty of doing more times than I can count. So it's really putting all these different aspects into play. So all of this different learning and everything, it needs to be applied. And so one bridge to applying that and a bridge to problem solving is the concept of transfer. And transfer is cool because it's kind of like this picture. It's digging inside of your head for all this different information and skills that you've learned in the past or in different situations, and then applying that learning to another. So anytime that you're faced with any sort of unanswered questions or in a situation that you're unsure of, we're basically pulling from our previous buckets of knowledge in order to go ahead and solve those problems, and that's called transfer. And so problem solving, in essence, is a way of transferring the information that we have to a new situation. And as teachers, one of the ways that we can promote these skills is by teaching with a less is more attitude. So really going deeper and emphasizing how that material can be used in the future. I feel like our thematic units were really an awesome opportunity to do that, in the sense of, pulling on what they already knew from the very beginning by gathering that information, and then hopefully going deeper and deeper inside of this thematic, topic, and pulling from what they know to continually build on that. And then, hopefully, I know I tried to continuously pull in that information and apply it to everyday life, or give them opportunities to look at their lives and have discussions about, like, how does this apply? How can I use this in the future? Not just for, the worksheet that's in front of them, but where we're going with this in the future. So in terms of problem solving, there's a few keys to problem solving. Obviously, if we're looking at this here, thinking aloud, so it's a mental process, so talking yourself through the steps. Problem typically has multiple steps, so going through that. Also just allowing time for those ideas to marinate and gel together, so to speak, and pull from all those different areas, the transferring from place to place in your brain. And then also talking about the problem with someone else or a group, which is why group problem solving or team building type skills in problem solving is so great, because you're pulling from all sorts of different background knowledge that can come together and potentially solve that problem. And then that bridges into the next step, essentially, which is critical thinking. So, now that you've got all these elements of how to solve this problem, then you really need to break that down and analyze it. So critical thinking can also be called logical thinking. So it doesn't involve just the problem solving, but you're taking a look at creativity, the organization, the strategic planning part, your decision making, all sorts of different components. And really, essentially, you're sorting, classifying, and comparing all those similarities and differences. And so it's really, higher level analysis of, did I come up with the right conclusion? Is this probable? Is this even possible? So when we break larger things down in smaller parts, they do become easier to understand and to solve. So that's certainly something that we can help our kids do, and we can model that in many different ways. So I think the neatest thing is just taking a look at how all of this fits together. So if we look at this list, this Bloom's taxonomy of critical thinking skills, we start out with 1 and 2, knowledge and comprehension, which is really the metacognition and, using our study skills to make sure that we understand, we gather the knowledge. And then 3 is the application, where we're really problem solving. And then when we go on to 4, 5, and 6, which is analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, that's the critical thinking, where we're taking things to a higher level and really taking a look at how does this work, what evidence, is this right, is this wrong, is it successful, do we agree, do we disagree, what's the most important. Another way to look at it, here's another slide, just proving again that it all fits together, that in the center we're regulating our own cognition, which is metacognition, and our own cognitive knowledge, and then that branches off to the critical thinking, the problem solving, our own self-regulation, and really ultimately leads to effective learning. So I think that I can only explain this so well, but Dr. Derek Cabrera has a TED Talk called How Thinking Works. And what I love is that he is able to show us, not only how thinking works from his point of view, but also, the problem with, or I should say the downfall of our thinkers today, as we've definitely discussed a few times in school, or in our classes, our students, by the time they get to college, they're good at school, but they're not good at life. They're not adequately prepared for the real world. They don't come equipped with these problem solving and higher level critical thinking skills. And so he really talks about, I want to say what's wrong with the system, but how he sees, from a bottom-up approach, how we can take a look at that. So go ahead and, if you'd like, use your own study strategies, such as note-taking or whatnot, to glean the highlights of this TED Talk. And I will catch up with you at the end when it's over.
When I first started working, teaching in the Ivy League, I had very high expectations. These are the kids that are the cream of the crop of our educational system. They get the highest GPAs, the highest SATs, the most AP courses. These are the smart kids, right? And so I was very excited to work with them. I soon learned and saw some things that I didn't expect. I noticed that my students could take any test and get an A. Any test I could give them, they could take it and get an A. I noticed that if I gave them instructions for the assignment, they could ace the assignment. But any time that I gave them an unstructured assignment, any time that I didn't tell them exactly what was on the test prior to the test, they had great difficulty if I asked them to solve a novel problem of some kind. They had really great difficulty. And I was surprised by this. I wondered to myself, what were they doing for those years in their K-12 experience? And what I came to realize is what they were doing was getting very good at doing school. They got very good at school. And I was worried that this skill wouldn't transfer to being good at life, that those skills might not be transferable. My kids could win at the game show Jeopardy. They were full of information. They had encyclopedic recall of facts. But they didn't have, they weren't knowledge able. They didn't have an ability with knowledge that they could take information and structure it and do something with it to solve a novel problem. In a word, they couldn't think. So, what is thinking? What does it mean? What do we mean when we say thinking? Thinking is simply a process of structuring information and doing something with it. Taking information, structuring it, organizing it in such a way to do something meaningful with it. Now, there are a number of different types of thinking, major types of thinking. There's creative thinking, critical thinking, there's systems thinking, interdisciplinary or scientific thinking, and there's also emotional intelligence or pro-social thinking. Now, these are all wildly important thinking skills. All students need to know them. We shouldn't discriminate among them. Of course, our schools don't discriminate among them. They're killing all of them equally. Now,
Love that.
this problem that the problem of students getting to college and not being able to think is an educational problem. It's rooted in education, but it has global effects. These global effects are not just seen by professors in classrooms, they're seen by everyone. Parents worry that their students don't have the common sense skills to make it in life. Teachers worry that what they're doing in the classroom isn't preparing kids for life. And businesses and CEOs, when they're interviewed, they consistently complain that the applicant pool is not ready for the workforce. Of course, as citizens and voters, we can see the 24-hour news cycle, polls, and even presidential debates lacking in critical analysis and thinking. And who among us hasn't wanted to, at least once, throttle a customer service person for their thoughtless automaticity? This problem starts with education, but it has global implications. How many of you have played with Legos? You played with them as a kid? I played with them as a kid, and when I got them, they were in a bucket, right? They came in a big bucket. There were no instructions. You threw them out on the floor, and you were able to make whatever you wanted. You could make a bridge. You could make a house. You could make a pterodactyl if you wanted to. Well, that's not how they come today. Today, it's dependent on instructions. They come in a box like this, a kit like this, and it's very dependent on the child reading the instructions in order to build the kit. If you don't follow the instructions, you're not going to end up with an Imperial dropship with 4 stormtroopers, and you certainly can't build a pterodactyl with this kit. Here's my fear. It's not that there's not a lot of thinking that goes into these kits. There's a tremendous amount of thinking that goes into these kits. And it's all happening on a desk in Billund, Denmark at LEGO headquarters. The people who design these kits are making great strides in their thinking. But it's not happening on the kid's desk where the kid is building it. My fear is that this LEGO example is a metaphor for what's happening in education today. We are, as curriculum designers and teachers and educators, over-engineering the content curriculum. And we're surgically removing the thinking so that our kids are simply following instructions, painting by the numbers, and getting the grade. We need to get thinking back on every desk. I'm happy to say that the educational conversation, the conversation nationally, has moved to talking a lot about education. That's a great thing. Lots of people are talking about education. Everybody's got different solutions for how to fix education. And the best thing is we know that it's broken. The system is broken. And that's a good thing because knowing it will help us to fix it. Now, the most important thing that we have to remember is that education is not going to be fixed from a top and trickle down approach. It's going to be fixed from a bottom and bubble up approach. There are over 60 million lessons taught every day in this country. 60 million. That is where education happens every day, in those 60 million lessons, where teachers and students and ideas come together in a triad. We've got to get thinking back into that equation. We've got to get thinking at every desk. Now, I've traveled around the country and the world talking about the importance of thinking. And I'll tell you this, I've never really met anyone who seriously looks me in the eye and says, I don't think thinking is that important. We all know that thinking is critically important. And yet, even $1 billion of research from the Gates Foundation shows us that in education, the way to fix education is to teach thinking skills. So what are we doing to teach thinking skills in the classroom? In my work with classrooms and schools and districts around the country, I see one very common strategy. I call it the bandwidth solution. The idea is that if we simply put enough information, if we increase the size of the pipe and we ask students to learn more stuff, that somehow, miraculously, they will end up being thinkers. It reminds me of one of my favorite cartoons. We do this stuff, and then a miracle occurs. And then, of course, thinking will happen. And I think of the faculty of this country, and myself included, as being sort of from the future. We get the kids, when they're done with the K-12 system, we get them. So in a way, we come from the future with a message. And that message is, the miracle didn't happen. Our college students can't think. We don't need a miracle. What we need is a method. We need the ability to teach thinking through a method in our schools alongside the lessons. There are 4 universal thinking skills that research shows are happening and that we can use to teach kids how to think. If we teach these skills, they lead to those 6 types of thinking I talked about: critical thinking, creative thinking, interdisciplinary and scientific thinking, and even pro-social and emotional development. The first thing that we can do to get kids thinking again is to teach them to make distinctions between ideas and objects and things. What does it mean to make a distinction? What we mean is to define our terms. But we don't just want to define the terms. We want kids to learn to increasingly over time create more sophisticated, more nuanced distinctions. We want, when a student takes something and makes a distinction, they're actually bringing something into existence. And in doing that, we get a deeper understanding of things. We have more clarity of thought, and in turn, more clarity of communication. The second thing we can do to get kids thinking again is to teach them to look at the parts and the wholes that make up systems. Every part is a whole, and every whole is a part. That is universal. It's often said in science that there are really fundamentally just 2 kinds of scientists. There's splitters and there's lumpers. Splitters are the scientists who sort of break things down into parts and then break those parts into parts and so on and so on. And lumpers take all the parts and they put them back together again. What we need to do is create a new generation of young students who are splumpers, who can split and lump easily. They can construct new ideas and they can deconstruct old ideas or existing ideas. The third thing we can do to get thinking back into the classroom is to recognize relationships, to teach our children to recognize relationships between and among ideas. In our schools today, we almost teach the lack of relationships or disconnection. We teach in departments, in courses, in subject areas, and in disciplines. And yet we know that the world is a very interconnected place. We need to get our kids seeing more of these connections, more of these relationships. The fourth thing that we can do to get our kids thinking again is to take multiple perspectives. Everything looks different when you take a new perspective. And when we teach perspective taking, there are things that are correlated with teaching perspective taking that we all want. Increased empathy, increased compassion, increased pro-social thinking and emotional development. Even things like increased skills of negotiation and conflict resolution and spatial reasoning. Perspectives are wildly important. Distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspectives, what I call DSRP, will get kids thinking again. And they combine in lots of different ways to create an ecology of thoughts that are very, very complex. They're actually universal to the process of thinking. And they're universal to that process of taking information and structuring it and turning it into some kind of knowledge that we can use. Our kids are flooded with information. We're all flooded with information in this day and age. There's information coming at us from all directions. The number one thing we can do for our children is give them the tools to structure that information in meaningful ways so that they can do something with it. And believe me, if we don't teach them to think, there are plenty of people who will happily think for them. I'm happy to report that these 4 skills, D, S, R, and P, are being taught in preschool to grad school around the country and around the world. We're seeing remarkable effects. Little kids are learning the same thinking skills that the big kids are learning. What he's doing actually is he's organizing his Cheerios, his strawberries, and his blueberries, and he lines them up and groups them together, and then he eats them based on the ones that he likes that particular day. And what's remarkable about this photo is that at this time in Carter's life, he doesn't actually know the words for blueberry, strawberry, or Cheerios. But he is making distinctions. He's taking perspectives and grouping things into little part-whole systems and making relationships. He's doing DSRP. In fact, he and all of us are hardwired to do DSRP. These are universal processes of structuring information. Now, as Carter goes into our school system, he will be encouraged to begin memorizing information and regurgitating it. He will be encouraged to take tests. He'll be encouraged to follow instructions. And in particular, he'll be encouraged not to make any mistakes and look only for the right answers. Over time, he will be discouraged from his natural talent for thinking, a talent we all are born with. Now, Carter is my son, but someday he'll be somebody's student. He'll be somebody's employee. He'll be somebody's boss, somebody's husband, somebody's father. He'll be a voting citizen in our democracy. His ability to think is no more important than any child's ability to think. I'm reminded of the global effects of thinking every day when I leave my house and I see this on the wall of my barn as I leave the house. Thinking really lies at the root of democracies. In our Declaration of Independence, it says that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. I have a question for you. What is the meaning of that consent if the governed are not thinking? As a solution to the educational problem, getting thinking at every desk might seem far-reaching. But I am given hope every time I hear from a parent that says, my daughter, in learning these thinking skills, has completely changed in just 6 months. I'm given great hope when I hear from teachers who say, I'm more engaged and more excited about teaching than ever in 26 years because we're teaching thinking skills, which are going to matter for these students. I have more hope that we can fix the problems of education when I see these little Head Start kids learning the same 4 thinking skills that doctoral students in the Ivy League are using, that inventors, experts, and scientists are using every day, and they're learning them at a young age. It gives me great hopes that we can fix education. We can do this, but we need to get started right away. We need to get teaching thinking back at every desk. Thank you very much.
Wow, I just think that he sums up everything about metacognition and critical thinking and the importance of it so so well. And I hope that if you get anything out of it, it's that really our opportunities, especially as elementary teachers, is that it starts with us in the classroom and the the 60,000 lessons that are taught. And that's the key where we can really start implementing these thinking skills. And so, just his DSRP in terms of making distinctions, systems of looking for the parts and the wholes, relationships, meaning connecting subject matter between interconnected learning theories and whatnot, and then perspectives, that there's multiple perspectives. And so he's saying that this DSRP ultimately leads to thinking, and we can give them those tools to structure that information. I love the Lego analogy as well, how he's saying that we're basically paint by number and surgically handing over all this information. We're killing thinking in the children today by not teaching them these thinking skills. So essentially, I'm sure you've heard plenty of times, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And so I really believe that if you get anything out of this entire presentation, it's that, we have the privilege and opportunity to teach them to fish, to teach them to think. So of course, the question is, how do we do that every single day, as elementary teachers? So in addition to Dr. Cabrera's, DSRP, first of all, the supportive lesson handouts that I gave you, the handouts, both of those go over not only metacognition, but strategies, some creative problem solving, suggestions that you can use to raise the level of cognitive thought in your classrooms. One of the things that you can do, you can start modeling the problem-solving process to your kids. You can think out loud so that they can hear your own thought process and begin to, hopefully mirror that. And then also when you ask the students directly about their thought processes, then they have to learn how to articulate that out loud. And most likely, you can help them and guide them. And one way to do that is by mirroring back their ideas, but putting in different thinking words, like I'm thinking, I'm noticing, I'm wondering, what are you planning, what does that feel like, figuring out, seeking this, I'm seeing that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can lead to those processes to opening up. Another thing you can do is give goals. So before a lesson even begins, give clear goals on what they'll be, expecting to learn from the experience, so they know where this is going and how it's going to apply in their life. Also, as we've discussed a few times, provide opportunities for self-evaluation and reflection on whatever it is that they're doing or learning. And then we talked about study strategies earlier in your notes, and most likely most of the things you wrote down, we kind of learned all these different study strategies along the way, but never, it was really, our own self-regulation and being intentional that we apply those, but we could also as teachers do a much better job of teaching those strategies to the kids and then really encouraging them to use them over and over and over again. And then of course, engage the five senses, allow the children to draw off of all their different multiple intelligences, and encourage those things. And then on one of my sheets in the handout, there's also a list of creative problem-solving activities. So the penny problem, deductive reasoning, the egg drop, pull it apart. So these are some direct ideas that you can take into your classroom as soon as tomorrow and start building those skills with your students. It certainly is a tall order, knowing that essentially it comes down to us, but we are the key to helping these kids be successful and prepare them, and so that they're not just good at school and regurgitating information, but really preparing them to be good at life. So to wrap everything up, I'd love to know your thoughts. If you could get that piece of paper back out and take at least 60 seconds, again, of free writing and reflecting on what you've learned, and answering these two questions. So what is your opinion about potentially adding a metacognition and critical thinking class to the core curriculum for our students? And how may this better prepare our students for the future? Thank you very much. We'll continue this discussion.